Okay, we are doing Hilchos Treifos Siman Mem Bet. Dine Treifos Hamara. So now we're going to learn about the gallbladder. Aleph. Sif Aleph. Mara Shenikva Treifa. So that's mefurish from the Gemara. If it has a hole in the Mara, that turns into a Treifa. V'imnikva kanagera kaved. But if that hole is where it attaches to the kaved, it's up against, there's a hole there, but it's pushed up against the liver. V'akaved sotamo, and the kaved basically seals it off just because it's pressed against it. So it's a kshera. That's a kshera, no problem. Okay. The Shach just points out from the Gemara, but if there'd be a hole in the kaved in the exact same place, so the two holes are opposite each other, and you can have, let's say, air or liquid go from one to another, that would be a treifa. Okay. I don't know how often that comes up, but okay. Nisracha hamara lamakom acher kshera. Now, this we learned a few times, that if you have a sircha, an adhesion going from the mara, going anywhere else, it's a kshera, not a problem. Because we learned the only times a bua and a sircha, there might be a small caveat, but very quasi maybe, if you go to Siman Mem Vav, but basically, anytime you have a sircha in the animal, it's never a problem of treifa except for the reya. The reya, the lung, is when it's a problem for a sircha. Okay, that's when it has the potential to make it a treifa. Okay, because by the lungs we're assuming it's a hole, that was or will be, and by the other, apparently by the other animals, the other organs, it's not an issue of a hole. Okay, let's go to bet. Nitla biyad o chaser, sif bet. If the entire gallbladder is missing, it was taken away, it's missing, so the halacha is it's a treifa. Now it happens to be, the Gemara doesn't say this, it's a machoket rishonim, because it's a kol sheken. If it has a hole, kol sheken, if the whole thing is missing, it's a treifa. So that's what the vast majority of the rishonim paskin, so that's the psak. But there is, we'll see why this comes up, there is a minority opinion that says it's kasha. Okay, so it's interesting to note this as we continue. Gimel. Im chasera hamara. So we just learned, if the mara, the gallbladder, is completely missing, it's a treifa. However, there's a caveat. Keep reading. Korea hakaved sheti ve'erev. So then what do? Game's not over yet. You cut open the mara, slice it open. What? The kaved, sorry. Correct. Right? The mara is missing. So what do? You cut open the liver. And you slice it open, sheti ve'erev, horizontal, vertical, and you v'to'amo, bilshono. And you taste it. Put it on your tongue. Taste the kaved. I don't know if it's 100% agreed upon, but the Kaf HaChaim writes, the halacha, you rinse off the blood before you taste it because you don't want to be eating the blood. So we're not eating it, we're tasting it. So, okay, so to the best of my knowledge, if it's rinsed off, you're allowed wait, not the kaved. The kaved, we'll get there when we get to dam. Okay. Im yitom ta'am mar kshera. So what do? You take a bite out of it, okay? And you taste it. You taste it. Taste it with your tongue or not your tongue, we'll see. Yeah, taste it with your tongue. If you can swallow it or not, we'll see. So you taste it. And if the liver has a taste of a bitter taste to it, so then you know it's coming from the gallbladder. So that means there was one, and so then it's kshera. There was one. As long as there was one, and now somehow it's missing, it's a kshera. V'im lo ta'am ta'amar. But if you didn't taste one, or didn't taste any bitterness, yitzilenu b'gechalim. So game is still not over. Then you roast it. Okay, v'yitom, you grill it, v'yitom im yesh bo ta'amar kshera. And then you taste it, Okay, right? So here's your koshering it, so here you're eating it. But you taste it and you see if there's any bitterness. If you can still taste it now, then it's a kshera. V'im lav treifa. But if the gallbladder is missing and you can't taste any bitterness, or when it's raw, or when it's cooked, so then we call it a treifa, and that's not okay. And the Rama writes, and here we are able to do this. Right? Sometimes we learned we don't do bedikas, but it doesn't refer to everything. You are allowed to taste it and decide, and that's the halacha. However, there is a discussion in the poskim, because this comes up later, I think it's in Sadichet, where normally we don't say you can taste, let's say you don't know if something is kosher or not. So normally the halacha is you can't taste it to find out, because if you find out it was treifa or machal isser, you just ate an isser. So you can't taste it to find out if it's asr or mutter. So what's going on over here? So the reason why they allow it over here, so the Shach points out, so it's a machlokas. So the Shach says, why are you allowed to? Because almost for sure it's going to be bitter. Almost always animals have a gallbladder, and even if you don't see it, it's there, it was there, and it's going to be bitter in the liver. So the chances are very slim. So in that case, you're allowed to. Also, the Taz also puts another reason, because there are some poskim who write, even if the Rishonim, right, Machloket Rishonim we mentioned, even if the Mara is completely missing, there's a Rishon, or a couple of Rishonim, I don't know, I don't remember, but it could be that it's still kosher. So basically the Taz says we're relying on that opinion. Also, here the Shach is clear that tasting it is, if it's an Isser in general, tasting it with your tongue and spitting out, the Shach holds is Asr. The Taz says that in general, anytime you taste it with your tongue but don't swallow it, that's mutter. Even in the case, when we get to Tzadichet, normally by tasting Isurim. And it seems that generally the halacha is like the Shach, that anything that's mamish asr to taste, you're not allowed to taste it even with your tongue, even if you're going to spit it out. But the Pischei Tshuva over there writes that if it's an Isser Darabanan, such as Pagum, then most of the poskim say you are allowed to. So anyway, here we're talking about an Isser Treifa Daraisa. Anyways, the Kreisi says better to have a non-Jew taste it for you. As he says, Metzias, the Kreisi believes if you don't see it, it's almost never going to taste bitter. So, okay, let's go on. Dalet, Sif Dalet. Nimtzu shtei maros. Now, if you find two gallbladders, so the halacha is Treifa the kenetula dame. So, since we had two and you're only supposed to have one, we say it's as if you have none. They're both missing. All right, as we saw before. But maybe when you're looking at two gallbladders, it's really only one, but it formed into like two round sacs, but it's really one. So what do you do to make sure? Nokvin ota, right? This you're allowed to check. You make a hole in one of them. And if it goes from one to another, it's a kshera. But if they look like two and they act like two and the liquid doesn't go through two and it's from one to another, then we say it's two and that's a treifa. Hey, if you put a hole, you popped a hole into one of them, but the liquid from one doesn't go to the other. So don't give up yet, you can blow them up. If you blow into one and that blows up the other one, then that's good enough. Or if you add water into one of them and that water flowed into the other one. So first you pop it, that's the easier test, but then don't give up. Maybe it can still flow. And the Shach says from the Beis Yosef, because if you just pop a hole, the liquid inside could be very thick. and it doesn't easily flow from one to another. But air, with the pressure of air, it's thinner, the water is thinner, so then as long as it's able to flow through bedochak, then that's considered one, and then it's a kshera. Okay, let's go to Vav. Afal pi shehen shtei maros gemuros rak b'makom dibukan b'kaved k'marochav etzba hayu ka'achas kshera. So let's say it looks completely like two, and nothing even flows from one to another, but where they're attached to the liver, both of the same two gallbladders are attached to each other at that place. So it looks like two, nothing flows from one to another, but they're all attached, the two are attached together at the kaved together. As long as the attachment is at least a width of an etzba, right, maybe we'll call that 2 centimeters, so then afilu ilo shavchei adadi, nothing flows from one to another, it's a kshera, it has a din of 1. Because they're attached with the width of at least an etzba, and we'll just call it a blockage, but it's still considered 1. Avehu adin imitchilatan hayhen shtayim ubesof hem mitarvot v'nasat achas kshera. Even if you believe it was originally 2, and they were completely separate, but then as they grew, they fused and became 1. Right now they're 1, even though you think they were 2, it's a kshera.
I think he's not even necessarily talking they join in time, join in space. Where they're connected to the liver, there's 2 separate, they're not connected at all, and then later, higher up, vertically, they join.
So then they're joined.
Yeah.
Okay. Zayin. Hayu shtei maros b'kaved. Now let's say you had 2 maros shtei maros attached to the liver. Achas heina v'achas heina. So they're completely separate. Right? We keep going in order. We're getting more and more separate in each case. So now they're completely separate, and they're not attached at all. However, you do have a pipe, some kind of vessel connecting the two. V'simpon echad shofech mara lishtein. And so where it's the bile's coming from, it flows through the tube and it enters both of them. So they're connected through a vessel. וכשאדם זוקף האחז חוזרת ליכה למקום שהסימפון מחלק מרה ושופך לשתיהן. And you could squeeze it or move it so that the liquid goes from one to another through this vessel. Okay, so they're completely separate, but there is a tube, a vessel that is connected to both of them. Normally they don't travel from one to another. And while it's alive, they're not going to flow from one to another. But you're able to manipulate it to go from one to another. Yesh lahachshir b'mehimat Yisrael. So if a Jew already owns it, and it's yours already, and it's going to be hefsid meruba, so then it's kshera. Now the Shach just wants to point out that this really, the original source comes from a chuvas of the Rashba, and there it's mashma that the Rashba would say it's asr lechatchila, even if it belonged to a Jew. So the question is, how do you deal with the hefsid meruba? But if it wouldn't be, certainly the Rashba would be machmer. But here, so the question is could be the Shulchan Aruch only referring to hefsid meruba, but he doesn't say that. So the Shach says he's mekel because even if there wouldn't be a mara at all, like the minority opinion of the Rishonim, it would still be a kshera. So here, if it belonged to a Jew, and because there's the other opinion, so it's like a built-in hefsid meruba, or with the suffix, or a hefsid with the suffix, and so therefore it sounds like he's mekel lechatchila when it belongs to a Jew. Okay. Now, and so too that help. So that's the Shach interpretation of the Shulchan Aruch, which is basically the pshat reading of the Shulchan Aruch, and that follows the psak of the Maharshal also. Haga. Now, Mara hanikeret me'ever le'ever shala kaved, yishavchi ladadi chadehi. Now, even if you have a Mara that it goes from one side to another and it flows from one to another, kshera, it's a kshera, v'ilo shavchi ladadi treifa. But if it's not, if it doesn't flow from one to another, right, because I believe he means there's 2 maras on each side. Otherwise, or it's not connected when it's be'etzba in one place.
Yeah, it's surrounded.
It's
Connected on either side of the kaveh,
right,
and they don't.
but I'm not.
So it's attached. It's attached above the kaveh, and they fork from one to the other. Then it's one.
Right, and if it's attached with an etzba, then I believe he would agree. Like we learned before, it would be a kshera. Okay, let's get to the next case. Chet. Yesh mine ofo she'en lehem mara. Now, there are some birds that don't have a mara at all. It lives without one. Kamo torim u'bnei Yonah, just like I'll translate it as doves and pigeons. What's the difference? Thanks. So my basically Torim in general are going to be the older ones, Bnei Yonah are younger ones based on when the feathers. This is from the first parak, the middle of the first parak of Chulin, where it discusses that basically one is older, one is younger. It's when the feathers change, gets a little golden, and that's the age difference. But they're the same species as far as we know. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Ve'ein la'osran, and just because it doesn't have, we know they don't have a mara, so therefore when you see it doesn't have a gallbladder, it's not usr. It's not a case of a missing one. Kevan shekol hamin kach, they're all like that. That's the way they are, and that's normal. Ve'hatzvi, now again, what is it tzvi? People usually call it a deer, but it's probably not. It's okay, whatever a tzvi is. Ein lo mara bekaved. So it doesn't. So it does have a gallbladder, but it's in a different place. It's not attached to the liver. It's further back on the. We'll call it more at caudal, towards. It's closer to the tail, and so therefore that's what's normal for it, and that's also what's kosher. And just like we learned before, it was interesting. By a kaved, if all of it's missing except for two kzesim, it has to be where it's attached to the mara, and it has to be where it's attached to where it's attached for it gets its source, where it comes from. Here, by a tzvi, it's in two different areas. So it's machloket achronim. If one kazayit is enough wherever it's normally attached to, or if it needs to have an extra kazayit where it would be, even though it's not. Where the mara would be, but it's not there. Okay, anyways. Let's read the Haggah. Misha balafana of she'eno makir mino v'lo nimsa lo mara. So, ein omrim vadai kol min ein lehem mara. Ela asrina mistama at she'edea she'min ein lo mara. So if you don't know if you have a bird, and you don't know what it's normally, right? You're not familiar with the bird. But you know it's a bird, so it's it's a ksher amin, but you don't know if it has a mara.
You have the word asrinan?
I have the word asrinan. What do you have?
Amrinan.
I have. Oh, interesting. Asrinan or amrinan, mistama ad shedeh. Either way will flow fine. It's aser because we don't assume that this bird, right? You cut open this one bird and you see there's no mara, and you never studied if this bird has a mara, so you don't assume because this one doesn't have a mara, none of them have a mara, and it's aser at least until you know better. Okay, just as out of interest, the following do not have a gallbladder: deer, horse, rats, laminoids, and some birds such as pigeons and invertebrates. And we can live without one. So just for whatever that's worth. Tet. Garin shenimtza b'mara. Now you find a pet inside a mara. This is where the Gemara talks about the date versus the olive, not regarding the thickness, but this is the source. You find. So that's a question. So very good. So it certainly means could mean a pit. But I've seen some say that it's quoted in Chulin Illuminated, that some want to say maybe it's how does that get there? It's referring to a stone. Exactly, it's formed in the body. Shenimtza b'mara, imi kamo garina shel tamara. But pashtus, it's referring to a real pit. But anyways, if it's like a date pit, it's going to be she'ein rosh echad muteret. because the ends of the pit, and the whole pit, is smooth and round. It's not sharp, so therefore it's mutter. We're not going to assume that it was punctured and went through the mara, because a nekev in the mara is a treifa. So we're not going to assume that. V'im rosha chad ki garina shel zait, but if it's a pit that's an olive pit, or like an olive pit, or a stone that's sharp on the edges and the ends, or anywhere, so then we're going to be choshesh that maybe it punctured through the wall, and it's an asura. The animal is an asura. So because we say sheharei nikva ota kashenichnasa, because we're assuming that this item, a pit, punctured its way through, and that you don't see the hole anymore, it's because it healed. Haga v'kol shekain im nimtza machat akotz b'mara de treifa. And kol shekain, right? We learned if you see a machat or a kotz, a needle or a thorn inside the mara, it's a treifa. And Shach points out it doesn't matter what direction it is. Right? It's a sack and it can flow out, and there's no stomach. It came from the tubes. Otherwise, and yeah, we'll stop here.